Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, February 23rd, day 506 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz. Hi, David. Thanks for joining me on this wintry day.
Hi, Amanda.
6 Israelis held hostage by Hamas were released yesterday, 4 of whom were taken on October 7th, 2023, and 2 were in the Strip for about a decade. David will update us on what we are learning about the really horrific conditions of their captivities. Israel has delayed the release of some 600 Palestinian security prisoners, and we'll hear the reasoning behind the decision and what could be its effects, especially as the second phase of the hostage release/ceasefire deal is still unsettled. The funeral of former Hezbollah head Hassan Nasrallah is taking place today. We'll hear who is meant to attend in Beirut. All this and much, much more when we're back. First, an update. The IDF has deployed tanks to the West Bank as it expands its ongoing counterterrorism operation in the Jenin area. It marks the first time since 2002's Operation Defensive Shield that the IDF has sent tanks in the Jenin area. 6 Israelis were released yesterday from Gaza. 5 all-Jewish Israelis were paraded on Hamas stages. 4 of these hostages were taken on October 7th. They are Tal Shoham, Omer Shem Tov, Omer Venkert, and Elia Cohen. An Ethiopian-born hostage, Avera Mengistu, was also force-marched onto the stage, and he was held in Hamas captivity for about a decade. He was released alongside Tal Shoham in the morning. Please listen to yesterday's daily briefing for reports on the 2 staged Hamas ceremonies. However, one hostage, Hisham al-Sayed, was quietly released yesterday afternoon and handed over to the Red Cross. He was freed without fanfare, according to Hamas, in respect to his Muslim faith. However, his father has told Israeli media that his son is in a very bad state, and it appears he is not used to being in contact with other human beings. His father said, quote, "He is not well, he is not in our world, a kind of Tarzan. After living for 10 years with animals, he does not communicate." David, this is just the tip of the iceberg of the stories that we're hearing so far. So tell us, what are we hearing about the treatment of Hisham and the other freed hostages?
You know, it's a dismal and horrifying stream of accounts. In the case of Hisham, as you rightly said, his father has been speaking, including this morning. I mean, already from yesterday, from last night, his father was talking about the evil of Hamas and how his son had been treated. And again, this morning, he said they're liars, that they have no respect whatsoever. And the notion that they, had not done a propaganda ceremony with him because out of respect for him being an Arab or something, that his father is making clear that they didn't do a ceremony for him because then people would see the state to which they had reduced him, not communicating, obviously not held with people. His father fears that he was alone maybe this entire decade. Can you imagine what that would do? I don't know how much lower one can think that anything can plunge when you're talking about the testimony that we've heard. We hear over and over again hostages chained hand and foot in some cases, held in complete darkness, protracted periods, almost all of their captivity in some cases, beaten, psychologically abused. Then you have the other saga that emerged last night, that for the ceremony in Nuseirat in central Gaza, at which 3 hostages were released, 2 others who are not scheduled for release. Of course, nobody living is scheduled for release anymore in the first phase of the deal. But 2 other hostages were brought there in a vehicle close to the stage and made to watch their fellow Israelis going free by captors who were delighting in the fact that they were not going free, and then released a propaganda video which, if they assume it serves their cause, makes you despair about their cause and the people who they think will be encouraged by this kind of activity. And then, of course, just go back another day and you're into the terrible, terrible, unthinkable saga of the Bibas family. and the knowledge that we now have that for all of Hamas's lies, which we never believed, that Shiri Bibas and her two little boys were killed in an Israeli airstrike, we now know that Israel is saying, first of all, that they were murdered, brutally murdered, in all three cases, with slightly more graphic detail in the case of the two boys, in that Israel has said in cold blood with their bare hands the captors killed them. In the case of Shiri Bibas, we had the additional, I don't even know, there aren't words, twist, that on Thursday, when purporting to have sent Shiri Bibas's body to Israel in a coffin marked in various languages, with the date of her quote-unquote arrest as October the 7th, they had not returned Shiri Bibas's body at all, and professed surprise at the mix-up, and then finally did send her body overnight, late at night on Friday, which was then identified and overnight and so on. This is an enduring horror show. Nothing should surprise us after October the 7th, that they invaded Israel from a territory where Israel had no presence, no demands, didn't want to believe that it would ever have to grapple with Gaza again, refused to believe that Hamas was preparing to do what it did, massacred 1,200 people in the most horrific circumstances, including rapes and other terrible crimes. We've known all of this. I guess there's something in our psyche as well that kind of refuses to stick with that, because we are horrified again afresh every time. But at the same time, there are different levels of inhumanity that are being shown here, different kinds. I mean, just different examples of terrible things you can do when you have lost all respect for humanity and life. And that's what we're seeing now as a nation. I think some of the world is seeing it. A lot of the world seems to insistently misunderstand. I don't know what the Arab world is seeing. And I find it, we know that Al Jazeera is basically a tool of Hamas, and that Qatar, which on the one hand is presenting itself as a mediator, at the same time is fueling by its support of Al Jazeera this inhumane mindset in the Arab world, this delight in humanity. It's incredibly troubling for Israel and for Israelis to think, well, where are the people in the Arab world who find this unbearable, who do not want to be stained by this behavior? Why is there not a great mass of outrage? And then you temper that by saying, well, maybe, just maybe, they don't want to believe that this is what is happening. They refuse to believe this was happening because otherwise they would act differently. But, I think we ask ourselves, do we understand what's going on in Gaza? We question and double check ourselves. Are we reporting this fairly? Are we making it clear to people all the elements of what is going on? I think if I was on the other side of this conflict, I would like to think I would be checking, wait a minute, do I understand everything that's going on? Are media sources and information that I used to trust, is it still trustworthy? And if it's not trustworthy, do I need to dig a little deeper? And wait a minute, do I need to start worrying that we are not being told the truth? And in fact, there's more to this, and I need to take a stand and find out more. I don't see any of that going on. I would hope that some of that is going on. But at the moment, it seems to me ever increasing examples of just this dreadful, inhumane. I don't want to use words like monsters and so on, because these are people who are doing this, and to a large extent, to an overwhelming extent, and people should call right in and say, no, look at the outrage and protests that we're hearing in this, that, or other country or community about what Hamas is saying and doing, because we'll report it if that's going on. I haven't seen indications of that.
I'm hearing slight murmurings here and there, but they're very isolated voices, of course. And everything you're describing, David, is what amounts to Netanyahu, our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calls humiliations. Of course, what you described with Evyatar David and Guy Gilboa Dalal being forced to watch as other captives were freed, and begging on this propaganda video that you referred to be saved as well, obviously scripted, as was, of course, Omer Shem Tov's kiss of his captors. It was scripted. They were being told to be showmen, to wave, to smile to the crowd. And then later we find out that many of the hostages who were released yesterday were either in isolation, as you mentioned, with Hisham and others who were taken on October 7th. Some were alone aside from the first 50 days. It's impossible to recognize how terrible an imprint that can leave on somebody's soul, of course. And of course, what you said about the body of Shiri Bibas being switched and then delivered without fanfare somehow, though I will note that the IDF did perform another ceremony over her body when it was received from the Red Cross into Israeli hands. All of this, as I said, adds up to humiliations. And because of these quote-unquote humiliations, Israel said early Sunday that it was delaying the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners who had been slated to go free yesterday until we receive an assurance regarding the end of these quote-unquote humiliating ceremonies staged by Hamas when the hostages are handed over. Now, these humiliating ceremonies, however, are nothing new. We've seen this from the very beginning. So what do you say, David, about this, shall we call it a pretext of not handing over the Palestinian security prisoners?
Yeah, I don't think it's a pretext. I think it's just too late. This whole exercise has been, humiliation is indeed an accurate translation-ish of I think the word in Hebrew that was used was bizui, which it's worse than humiliation, right? It's just outrageous and disgusting. And, I don't, we're not party to the contacts with the mediators. There's been a lot of complaints about the Red Cross, which in the last couple of exchanges seems to have, we don't know what goes on in those brief conversations, or we don't know what is planned before. Our understanding is the Red Cross has very, very limited capacity to do anything. It is just the reliable organization that can, at its own safety to date, at these events, which is not something to take for granted, has been able to come into contact with Hamas and safely bring out hostages. But the mediators, they're the people who are guaranteeing this deal. And you would have thought that more could have been done earlier in this process to say, no, this is not acceptable to us and this has to stop. We know that Israel has made a fuss in the past, but not to the point of using any leverage. So now we're at the final tail end of this phase one deal. There's 4 dead bodies, we believe, still to be returned on Thursday. And then it's over unless more agreements are finalized for further stages. So it's I don't think it's a pretext in withholding the release of the prisoners, but the leverage is fairly limited. So, if Hamas wants to, it will say, actually, no. And we don't know how it will play out from here. So it all kind of attaches to what goes on now with a phase 2, with the prioritizing of which of the 2 seemingly contradictory war goals, which is to secure the release of all the hostages and destroy Hamas. If those are not contradictory war goals, then the onus is on Israel to see how it can, as Steve Witkoff put it, square the circle and get both of those goals achieved.
We'll go to a short break and discuss this further. And we're back. Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer was reportedly set to meet U.S. Mideast Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Washington on Thursday to kick off talks on phase 2 of the hostage release and ceasefire deal with Hamas as mixed messaging emerges on the likelihood of a next step. Now, the very fact that we're describing it as kicking off the talks is very confusing to me because I was under the impression that the talks were kicked off on the day they were meant to be kicked off according to the ceasefire hostage release deal, at least according to Ron Dermer. David, what do you know about this kickoff?
Well, first of all, let's be completely clear about this. There's immense things that we don't know. We don't even know what range and scope of things we're not aware of at the hackneyed price of misquoting Donald Rumsfeld. Right. there's an awful lot that we don't know, and we haven't got a clue about how significant it is. We didn't know, for example, that there was an annex to this deal apparently that provided for the bodies to be returned at the pace and on the dates in which they have been and are to be returned. And indeed, on I think the 16th day, if I'm not mistaken, of phase one, they were supposed to start talks on phase two. And we've heard intermittently that there are delegations here and there are delegations there, and they have this kind of a mandate and they have that kind of a mandate. And, it's very hard to tell. The phase two brings with it the provision for the full IDF withdrawal and the maintenance of what becomes a permanent ceasefire, and the release of the remaining hostages. So again, we're in with those contradictory goals. And contradictory stances within Israel, where you have the security chiefs who've been saying for months, do it. You've got to get the hostages out. You can agree to anything. We know that Hamas will breach any kind of a ceasefire. That's what they'll do. And then we will not need a pretext. We will have an imperative to go after them again. The more so that you now have an administration in the United States that is basically supporting both of those Israeli goals, get all the hostages out and finish Hamas. So I don't think Trump is going to quibble about American support after the hostages are out when Hamas breaches the ceasefire for Israel going back and taking on Hamas. So it's hard to understand. That's all I can say. It's hard to understand why there would be the concerns and the complexities. The argument of the people who've said, no, resume the campaign, never mind phase two, has been, and it's been an argument made by many in the coalition, we won't be allowed to go back and tackle Hamas again. I don't see that is the case. I see an American administration that is saying the opposite, saying, well, of course, we want Hamas. Hamas has to be destroyed. That's what they're saying. They're using words like eradicated, stronger than language that is routinely used by many Israelis.
Right. We heard on Friday, of course, U.S. President Donald Trump saying that he's really fine with any decision Israel makes as to whether to continue to a second stage of the Gaza hostage deal or return to war in Gaza. And overnight, we heard from U.S. Deputy Mideast Envoy Morgan Ortagus calling Gaza a, quote, depraved society. So what do you think this does for Netanyahu in terms of his political standing ahead of these second phase negotiations?
Well, I think it helps bolster an argument, should he choose to make it, that says we have to get our people out of there. And we know that in doing so, we will be asked to end the war, end the fighting. Well, the fighting has largely tailed off. But we also know that we have an American administration that is saying the job is not done and that Hamas has to be eliminated. Now, again, that's terminology on the one hand, and then there's reality on the other hand. How do you eliminate Hamas without, we've been through this. We've been there for 16 months. How do you eliminate the military aspect of Hamas without doing immense harm to civilians, many of whom, for all we know, are extremely complicit in everything, and many of whom, for all we know, are not at all and would like to have nothing to do with this? How do you do that? We've been down this road before, but you've got an administration that you've got a president basically saying, I don't care how you do it. He's also saying, you've got to get all the hostages out, right? He's also saying, they're in terrible shape. I don't even know, these are tough calls, etc. Basically, you have an administration that is saying, you guys have got your two goals. We share and endorse both of those goals. Go do it however you want to do it.
Turning to the north, tens of thousands of people are gathering in Beirut to attend the funeral of Hezbollah's former leader Hassan Nasrallah, nearly 5 months after he was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a southern suburb of the Lebanese capital. The funeral is due to take place in a few hours at 1 p.m. and will include a speech by the current leader, Naim Qassem. So the real story here, as I see it, is what kind of Iranian presence are we going to expect to see here, David?
I don't know. We've heard lots of reports of very senior Iranian Speaker of the Parliament and various other people who are planning to attend. Lots of other people. Apparently, airlines had to lay on additional flights. I don't think I would be particularly comfortable about flying into Beirut, but lots of people are flying into Beirut right now. So this will be an attempt to kind of revive Hezbollah because it's not seen to be capable of doing enough terrible things to Israel at the moment. So this will be a way to showcase that, hey, it's trying to get its act together again. I think that's pretty worrying because it coincides, of course, with the imminent official Israeli line that people can move back to their homes in northern Israel. Tens of thousands of people who were evacuated, in many cases, have no homes to go back to. But in theory, things are sufficiently calm. Remember, the goal on that front was to enable the secure return of Israelis to the north. So you have a funeral for a mass murdering terrorist leader, with a great deal of support in some parts of the region. At the same time as you have Israelis being told by the government, hey, it's fine, you can go back to the north, nothing bad is going to happen.
The goal of Israel was not to eradicate Hezbollah, obviously. And the question now, as I see it, is how much of a political player will it be in Lebanon? Though it seems that after the elections, the new government is trying to really quench any kind of influence that it may have still in the government. What are you seeing, David?
Yeah, so I think, the difference in between Gaza and Lebanon is that in Lebanon, in theory, you have a semi-capable government and a semi-credible desire to make life a little bit better for the people of Lebanon and, by extension, their southern neighbor in Israel. I think, the jury should be well and truly out on how potent the new government is capable of being. Israel has largely pulled out of Lebanon, but it's kept 5 positions from which you can oversee a significant part of the border. That's not quite the same. And there's a hope that just possibly the Lebanese army will be more effective than it is in the past, and the government will indeed be more capable of marginalizing this semi-governmental terrorist army of Hezbollah. I think one should be incredibly skeptical and pessimistic, and I think that's what Israel is being.
David, thank you so much for your updates and insights today.
Can we have a cheerier conversation one day soon, just possibly, Amanda?
Inshallah. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.